A murder investigation with no suspects can be difficult and infuriating for police to try to get to the bottom of. But at the other extreme is a case with too many suspects. This can be just as confusing, especially if there are plausible reasons for all of them to have committed the crime. In both cases, the answer relies on diligent and efficient police work, leaving no stone unturned and drilling down to separate the wheat from the chaff in a given investigation. In today's case, there seems to be no shortage of suspects, so the police really need to do all their due diligence in checking and rechecking all of the information that they are given. Through this approach, the truth finally comes out, and they find a perpetrator whose delusional beliefs are almost too far-fetched to believe. This is the murder of Susie Casey in Montana in 2008, and this is Murder of Crows. It seems appropriate for a video on this particular channel that we will be going to the Badlands. Now, rather than being a specific ominous and arid geographical area, the Badlands are actually geological regions. Badlands refers to a type of dry terrain where softer sedimentary rocks and clay-rich soils have been extensively eroded. They are characterized by steep slopes, minimal vegetation, lack of a substantial regolith, and high drainage density. Ravines, gullies, butts, hoodoos, and other such geological forms are common in Badlands. Badlands are found on every continent except Antarctica, being most common where there are unconsolidated sediments. They are often difficult to navigate by foot and are unsuitable for agriculture. Most are a result of natural processes, but destruction of vegetation by overgrazing or pollution can produce anthropogenic badlands. In the US, Makoshika State Park in Montana and Badlands National Park in South Dakota are examples of extensive badland formations. Also located in this region is Theodore Roosevelt National Park, a U.S. national park composed of 3 geographically separated areas of badlands in western North Dakota, named, funnily enough, after former U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt. Petrified Forest National Park in Arizona, which is part of Navajo County, encompasses numerous badlands that also abuts the Navajo Indian Reservation and is directly north of Joseph City, Arizona. Many dinosaurs are believed to be buried in the immediate area, and exploration has been ongoing since the early 20th century. Maybe they should stop for a break. Just thinking out loud. Badlands have become a popular trope inside various media, particularly in westerns. Nestled within the Badlands of Montana is the city of Glendive. So associated with the geology of the region, the town motto of Glendive is "Good people surrounded by badlands." Do you see what they did there? But today's story will show that there are some people who visit the town that are as bad and twisted as the rock formations nearby. Glendive was established by the Northern Pacific Railway when they built the Transcontinental Railroad across the northern tier of the western United States, from Minnesota to the Pacific coast. The settlement mainly consisted of tents and log cabins, until a building boom ensued with the arrival of the first load of lumber in 1881. Today it is officially a city, but its small population of just under 5,000 means it retains a small town feel, with all that entails. A place where everyone knows everyone can breed a sense of community and of belonging. But with everyone knowing your business, it can be a hotbed for gossip and disdainful looks if your behaviour doesn't fit the societal norms. Susan Marie Limersand, known to loved ones and friends as Susie, was born into a close-knit, devout Catholic family in the town of Serco, Montana. She was the fifth of 6 children born to Marlene and her husband Jack, and Jack was at this time the county under sheriff. From a young age, Susie was fiercely independent, and if she worked hard, she was damn sure going to play hard. Susie had a passion for horses and loved to go riding, especially with her sister Carleen. She was a proper grafter, not afraid to be out there shoveling manure or fixing fences. Her family described her as fun and most definitely feisty. After graduating from high school, Susan moved 3 hours away to Billings, Montana, to attend a technical school. And it was there that she met Walter Larson, known to everyone as Marty. And before long, as their relationship progressed at breakneck speed, Susie discovered that she was pregnant. In 1993, Susie and Marty moved back to her hometown of Serco, Montana, and the couple had a beautiful church wedding surrounded by her family. Although she was young, her family was just happy that she was happy. The newlyweds welcomed their daughter Mariah, and then a few years later a son named Shay. However, their whirlwind romance and marriage wasn't destined to last. After 5 years, the couple divorced in 1998, with Susan gaining custody of both children, While Marty legged it and didn't look back. Her kids were her life though, so she made the best of the new situation. But if this first attempt at a lifelong commitment was a misstep, her next attempt drew her into a world of coercive control, as her insecure new beau would begin imposing rules on her. But this wasn't a sudden change into a dictatorship. His approach was much more gradual and insidious. While working as a medical transcriptionist, she met Ted Casey, a rugged, macho man's man with good looks who loved horses. Due to being 14 years her senior, her friends and family thought that he might finally be the one to settle Susie down, believing he was not only a great match, but also someone who could provide stability. And for a while he did just that. They married and had 2 daughters together, Kiana and Charlie. But Susie was very independent, and whether wisely or not, she liked to cut loose and have fun. So over time it was becoming a clash of cultures and values. And it wasn't long before Ted and Susie started having issues in their marriage. They had very different personalities and expectations of each other. Susan would tell her sister-in-law Valerie that he wanted her home by the 10 p.m. news and was constantly trying to tame her. Then one night, while out at the bar, things reached a boiling point. After a fair few drinks, always a good idea, they started arguing. Ted dumped a beer over Susie's head and found himself arrested, spending the night in jail after he slapped her across the face. And that was that. Their marriage ended that same night. Susie moved out, took all 4 kids, and found her own apartment in town. It didn't matter that Ted apologized and pleaded guilty to misdemeanor domestic assault. The marriage, as far as Susie was concerned, was done. Now, despite the split, Ted took his responsibilities as a father seriously and co-parented quite successfully with Susie. Marty Larson, well, considerably less so. Susie's divorce from Marty had been finalised in 1998, and he, she or they decided that a clean break was necessary. But in practice, this meant that Marty had not been in the lives of his children for almost 10 years until he was tracked down by his daughter. And this led to some sort of thawing between the former couple, and this in turn saw Marty renew contact with his children in 2007. By this time, Susie was living in Glendive in an apartment, and as I suggested earlier, Glendive was quite a judgy place. By 2008, Susie, mother of 4, would take the younger 2 to spend regular time with their father, Ted, who lived close by. But the older 2 had limited contact with a dad that they hardly knew, and as a result would often be left home alone while Susie went out to cut loose. Now, with 2 failed marriages under her belt, Susie wasn't rushing into any new relationship. But by 2008, she had a casual but mutually acceptable dalliance with a man from her distant past named Brad Holzer. Brad Holzer had re-entered Susan's life only 3 weeks before she disappeared, sometime in March of 2008. He'd been hanging out at a bar when he looked up to see a familiar face looking back at him, that being Susie. Years before, as teenagers, they had briefly dated, and then, like so many teenagers, they drifted apart. But by pure chance, they both found themselves at the same bar that night, all those years later. Obviously, they began catching up on old times, and it was as if those missing years had never existed. And on the night of 12th of April 2008, in what was for her a relatively normal circumstance, Susie took her 2 youngest children to Ted's home and left the older children to do their own thing at the Ponderosa apartment the family lived in. And Susie's oldest daughter, Mariah, was 14 by this point. She went out to a bar with Brad to meet up with friends and party, and this in and of itself was nothing new. But the events of the next day were new. As the day broke on April 13th, 2008, the 34-year-old was not getting in touch with anyone. And while this wasn't completely out of character, as time without contact crept forward, feelings of concern and uncertainty grew in the friends and family of the mother of 4. Based on the oldest kids' accounts, Mariah and Shay, their mum had never come back inside the apartment after leaving early Friday night. And inside the apartment there was no sign of a struggle or any indication that a crime had been committed. But outside the apartment, investigators noticed a couple of strange things. Susan's apartment building was located off the street, and it was in the doorway next to the building that they found a footprint in the dust. And what made this strange was that this particular entrance was no longer in use, but the footprint looked recent and fresh. Walking around the building, they noticed a drag mark in an alleyway. And although there was no sign of blood, the drag mark appeared as though something heavy had recently been pulled along the ground. With one ex recently back on the scene after almost 10 years out of Susie and their children's lives, one ex living nearby, and her current love interest, known to have been with her the night before she vanished, these 3 men all figured in the early people of interest that police wanted to talk to. But police interviews, along with surveillance camera footage, poor quality but still quite informative when combined with the collated timeline, soon saw one clear suspect emerging, and he would have quite the desperate story to tell.
Same thing we usually did. Talk, kissed, stuff like that. All of a sudden it was 4:30 and it was time to get back.
Where did you park when you got her home?
In front of that, what's that place across the street?
The Elks Club?
Yeah, the Elks.
Did you go in or?
No. She got out, walked back to her, across the street to her place like she normally does. I backed out. We drove away.
Do you know where Susan's at?
I have no idea where she is. I wish I did.
Okay. Where do you think she is, if you had to guess?
My guess would be Ted.
There was abusive past with you and her. Is that true?
Well, probably in her eyes more so than mine, you know.
I dumped a drink on her head, barely slapped her because she threw herself on the ground. We were both drinking and, didn't mean to, it just happened.
I went to City Hall that morning and stripped and waxed doors.
Did you go straight to City Hall?
Pretty close. I drove by Susie's apartment on the way.
The last time you were in Glendive was
Friday night.
what time did you get in Glendive then?
It had to be 4:30, 4:45.
And what did you do once you got to Glendive?
Let's see. The first thing I did was drive over to their apartment.
Okay.
I parked her out there before she went. I said, make sure you eat. Make sure you don't drink too much. You don't need to get a DUI and get in trouble like that. I'm going to go up there and I'm going to see if she's okay. Make sure that she got home, make sure everything's in the building. I went up and I knocked on the door softly because her bedroom is near the door, hoping, it would wake her and not any of the kids. Mm-hmm. And hoping, she'd come and tell me she was okay. And there was no answer, so I went out and called and texted a few times hoping to wake her up.
So did you ever encounter Susie at all?
No.
Okay.
I wish I would have seen her.
Please, everybody is very worried about you. Please call me. I'm worried. Please let me know that you're okay. If you don't call me back by 1 o'clock, I still need to hear from you, please.
The night of her disappearance, or more accurately, the morning, with it being about 5 a.m. on the 13th, Brad Holzer said he had dropped Susie at home and immediately left. But Glendive was still draped in darkness at this time, and CCTV showed vehicle lights near Susie's home as Holzer drove away in his truck. Police believed that this was Marty Larson, and they then closed in around the man. Marty told a tale of being concerned for Susie after he couldn't contact her, and then driving to her home to make sure she was okay, and getting no answer at the door to her home. But CCTV evidence indicated that he would have seen Susie be dropped off by Holzer, so he knew she had arrived home. But rather than leave, he went back to her home. Confronted with the evidence, Marty began to change his story and push forward with a delusion that he and Susie were planning a reconciliation.
The 10 years we were apart, I spent thinking she hated me. She thought I hated her. And in fact, we still love each other very much.
Were you kind of thinking that you two would get back together?
That was the plan.
But even with evidence, both physical and verbal, stacking against him, Marty, either delusionally or naively, stuck to his story that he was innocent and was only trying to help.
The only thing I have to say is I have no idea what happened to her. I don't know how she passed away. That's it. I pretty much knew when I was targeted years ago that something like this could happen at any time. I knew this day could come, so.
While all of the investigating was going on, around a month after she disappeared, Susie's remains were found in the Yellowstone River. The detectives working the case drove out to the river to confirm if it was indeed Susie, and when they saw the body, they knew immediately. She was wearing the same shirt Brad had described in his interview. No bra and only one shoe. Their missing persons case had now become a homicide investigation. An autopsy showed no signs of water in her lungs, meaning she'd already been dead before going into the water. Her hyoid bone was crushed, indicating that the cause of death was manual strangulation, which, of all of the ways to kill, is a very up-close and personal method for a killer to take their victim's life. Nearly 4 years after she vanished just steps from her front door, in February of 2012, a suspect was finally arrested. Marty Larson was apprehended outside his apartment in Phoenix, Arizona, and was charged with the murder of Susie Casey and extradited to Montana. Denied bail, he now awaited trial behind bars as the clock ticked on. But more heartbreak for the family was yet to come. Mariah, Susie's eldest child, now a bright, beautiful 18-year-old, was just 1 day away from graduating high school when tragedy struck. Authorities believe she fell asleep at the wheel, causing her car to veer into a ditch and roll. With no skid marks at the scene, the evidence suggested a quiet, tragic accident. The family, shattered, gathered at the small cemetery once more. For the third time now, they buried a beloved part of their hearts. Mariah now rests beside her mother, Susie, and her uncle. The case finally came to trial in 2013. The two sides were clear in their stories. In their closing argument, the prosecution laid out the chilling sequence of events one final time. Marty had arrived at Susan's apartment building before Brad and Susan, finding her car there but not her, so he just waited. He saw Brad pull up with Susan and he watched them together. As Brad eventually drove off, Marty stepped out of the shadows and confronted Susie. Marty had been simmering with jealousy and anger for months, and whatever was said in those early morning hours, it was clear that it didn't go the way that he had hoped. Susie fought for her life, with her fingers showing clear signs of struggle, before Marty ultimately strangled her. In a brutal act of rage, he dragged her through the alley, tossed her into his van, and drove toward the Yellowstone River, where he callously dumped her body as if it was rubbish. The defense, of course, tried to create doubt, arguing that the prosecution's theory was little more than speculation. They suggested that perhaps Brad or Ted were responsible for Susie's death, asserting that Ted had the most to gain financially from her death, given he was still the beneficiary of her life insurance. However, this claim was quickly dismantled by the evidence. It was easy to prove that Ted had used the life insurance payout to cover Susie's funeral expenses, and any remaining money was distributed among all 4 children. Hardly the actions of someone who had killed for financial gain. Marty's testimony was a critical moment in the trial, but his story didn't hold up under scrutiny. He admitted he had been in Glendive at the time of Susan's death, but his account was full of contradictions and inconsistencies. According to Marty, he had driven 3 hours to get to her apartment, parked in a spot where he couldn't even see her return, and then after waiting for some time, he just gave up and drove back to Billings without even attempting to see her. His actions were not those of someone simply concerned about a woman they cared about. They were the actions of a man whose desperation and anger had gotten the best of him. In turn, his testimony further weakened his defense, and the jury wasn't buying it. The jury's decision came swiftly, only taking 3 hours to deliberate before returning with a guilty verdict. On April the 5th, 2015, Marty Larson was sentenced to 110 years in prison for the murder of Susie Casey. He is not eligible for parole until 2042. And to this day he continues to claim his innocence, despite the overwhelming evidence against him.
The main thing is just that I had nothing to do with killing Susie. I would never have done anything to her or to take her away from my kids or her 2 little girls. I couldn't have done that. I can't make people believe anything. I know what I did. I know where I was. There are a lot of things I don't understand myself why I did them. I don't understand why, especially now, why I couldn't have just stayed home and tried to contact her a few times, and I guess in my head I had some sort of thought that I could do something to help if she needed help.
On that day in 2008, 4 children lost a mother. She wasn't perfect, but despite protestations, the father of 2 of those 4 children, lost within delusions of reconciliation, killed her and threw away her body like rubbish before continuing his life as if nothing happened. His callous actions and insistence on his innocence is a spit in the face to his son Shay. By not taking responsibility for his actions, he has no chance of rehabilitation, so he absolutely deserves to rot in jail. Now our thoughts turn to Susie Casey, and her family paid tribute to her in her obituary, with it saying in part, Susan Marie Casey, aged 34 of Glendive, died on April the 12th, 2008 in Glendive. Susie was born on January the 3rd, 1974 in Wolf Point, Montana, the daughter of Jack and Marlene Limersund. She was raised and educated in Circle, graduating from Circle High School with the class of 1992. While in high school, Susie was active in playing basketball for 2 years, band for 4 years, and participated in 4-H for 2 years. Following her high school education, she attended Billings Business College, where she graduated in 1993. Susie worked at the Macomb County Nursing Home in Circle for 5 years before moving to Glendive, where she worked at the Glendive Medical Center as a medical transcriptionist for the next 10 years. Her hobbies included playing softball, and she loved rodeos. She loved riding horses, and her favourite horse was Mark, apparently. Susie was a loving mother, daughter, sister, and aunt. She enjoyed a good time. This video is dedicated to her, and I send love to all of those who grieve the loss of this special lady. Thank you for watching another episode of Murder of Crows. Please like, share and subscribe if you enjoy the content. If you don't, then I guess don't. But with that said, I'm Steve, this here is Samson, and we will see you when we see you.
Say that you're ready, but you won't like it. You say that